Welcome to TC. Woo! My name is Fish. I promise I will introduce more about myself later on in the story. I am a pre-sales consultant based out of the Singapore office. And what that means is that in the past 5 years in my Tableau life, I have been working a lot with solutioning, problem solving, a lot of server reviews of your deployments, and also a lot of building dashboards. So what I want to do today is to share those tips and tricks, lessons I've learned and applied through my experience. So let's first start with some of the concepts that's closer to our life in terms of what makes an impactful interface. And that's the web UI we interact with every single day. So if you think about the web UI interface, you first want to have a good first impression, and that usually means the first 3 to 5 seconds. That first 3 to 5 seconds let people be enticed to want to go deeper and want to go further into reading what's in the interface. Next, we want that information on the interface to be digestible and clear, because the clearer the information, the better the experience your user will get. And next, familiar. What does familiar mean in the interface? It means that when you look at that screen, do you have an idea? Do you feel comfortable interacting with it? Do you know where to go? And delightful or delighting is usually the goal of an interface. You want to have a good experience. You want to know that when you try to click on something, it works. When you try to look for something, it's showing you what it's supposed to be showing. And finally, we don't want any distraction to the key message you want to show on the screen. So if we were to go back to designing a dashboard, we want to think about those principles in these topics. And we're going to cover these topics, and I'll try to give as many examples there is to give you an idea of what those topics mean and how you can apply it. So how many of you want to know why my name is Fish? That's about almost all 1,500 people's hands. So let's make a guess. I'm not a mermaid. Maybe I was an ex-Olympic swimmer? What do you think? No, I heard no. Do I like fishing? I got no there and no over there. Why are you guys so sure? Am I a big fan of Finding Nemo? Yes? What? Or do I have a secret identity? Oh, I got yes there. Well, actually, the story is not that cool. Where I'm from in Singapore, it's a multicultural society. If you go on the streets, there are the signs, the public signs, there are 4 languages: English, Chinese, Malay, and Tamil. And English is our working language. So what that means, if anyone were to call out my name or were to try to read my name, it will never be the one at the bottom. So those ones at the bottom give you exactly how to say my name, so try saying the one on top. What that means to me is I have to respond to all kinds of variations of how my name is said. Think about that. Anyone want to give it a try? No, so that's not right. And so instead, when I started my working life, I decided to keep it simple. So imagine, going to meet your colleagues or go see your customers or users. I don't want to spend the first 5 minutes teaching people how to say my name, and which I usually give up in the second try. And so I get people to say my name and just use my initial and keep my life simple. So that's a story. And that's kind of like an interactive story, right? And how we can relate back to the design dashboard world is there are 3 prerequisites we want to have a story in the first place, right? And the first, obviously, is the data, which is the information itself, the information you want to convey and deliver to your audience. And the second is the visual representation of those data, because visual representation allow people to understand those messages much easier and faster. And last but not least, narrative. And I want to put narrative at the center because I realize a lot of people, a lot of my users think that narrative is not important. They usually think of dashboard design in the angle of the visuals most of the time. But narrative is actually very important. Let me give you another example. When I was a kid, I was a big fan. I was very into art. I wanted to be an artist. I was very fascinated by the colors, and I was very fascinated with how the painting techniques create a lot of different output. So that was my serious hobby, but as a regular Taiwanese kid, I go to school, and after school we go to English class. There is nothing special about my life. It was just a serious hobby. So one day after my English class, my parents come pick me up, and they said in the car, "Do you want to go to Singapore?" I was 12. It was, long story short, it was basically a boarding school concept that makes you 2,000 miles away from your family. How many of you, when you were 12, would say yes or do that? 1. We can be friends? Anyone would put your kids or do a recommendation and say, yeah, that's gonna be an adventure. Nope. So when I was 12, I had selective hearing. The kind where someone in the house said, hey, go wash your dishes, and you go, what? Hey, that TV show is going well. Do you want to come join me? So what I heard, or how I completed the sentence was more like, I'm going to get on the plane and have a good time in Singapore. But of course, it didn't turn out that way. Nothing I thought happened. So in my first semester in school in Singapore, I failed everything because every single subject was in English. Like I said, the English was the working language. But I was too stubborn to give up. I wanted to finish what I started. So I worked really hard. I had no internet, no TV. When I go to school, try to get lunch, I will go to the queue with the longest line, or go to the store with the longest line, because I want to make sure I'm translating the right things to say to get my food. So finally, we got to the college. Oh, thanks, AV guy. And there were 3 universities in Singapore, and I had 2 offers or 2 options. One, the design school, and the other, the information system management school. And obviously, you can see from the picture, I chose to do that because I wanted to have more things to talk about with my older brother who was in computer science. So you see how narrative makes a big difference to storytelling? Yeah? So those makes what makes a story, those are the 3 prerequisites you must have, but what makes a good story? How can we tell a good story on top of these elements? And the first thing will be clarity. And finding clarity in a business scenario is a continuous process. And every iteration allows you to get your dashboard to be better and better. And what does iteration mean? When we talk about iteration, it means that you're going to ask multiple questions about the dashboard you're building. Is the question clear? Do you have enough data? Do you have all the data you need? Do you need more data? Do you understand the data? Can the visuals be clear and can it resonate with your audience? So you need to find clarity, and there's two ways I typically look at. And first is you have a story to tell. In this example, Mike, one of the Tableau's Zen master I learned a lot from, he has a story to tell. And you can see there's very little interactivity, but the grids, the reference line, allow you to see very clearly the conclusion that he's trying to lay out about when Americans' population of the aging will go across the younger children. So the objective here he's trying to do is to be clear, he's trying to be informative. He's just trying to inform instead of letting people explore and draw their own stories. So the next example done by my teammates in the London users, he allowed his users to create their own stories. And what that means is that when you look at this dashboard, there's a set of questions you can go through to draw your own conclusions. What's the current fund value? What's the latest day percentage change? How each investor is performing? What's the value per sector? What's the top and bottom 5 stocks per investor, per sector? So this framework allows you to construct your own story, allow you to conclude anything that is based on what you have explored. But if you want to have a bigger menu of options, this dashboard by Adam is personally what I find really useful. He created this dashboard with 5 different layers of categories, starting or categorized by the type of audience and the granularity of the data that you have. So on the top left, we have the KPI dashboards, which is similar to what we talk about in terms of informing data in the first example. And the one that goes closer to all the way down, right? As you go closer to the right or down, you're letting your users to explore and construct their own stories. Now, the next element is engagement. So I believe no one better than the media know how hard it is to keep people's attention. And the editors actually found a clever way to tell or to put the readers in the driver's seats. So what that means that over here in this section in New York Times, they let the users draw what they think the unemployment rate is before showing them the actual figure. So it let the users be personally invested in the story and keep their attention to what they're looking at. And of course, you can achieve the same in Tableau in many ways, such as dashboard actions. And in this case, it starts with parameters. And parameters is a good way to start because you let your users to input what they want to see and control the data and visuals. And over here, you can see you can also select a particular strategy, investment strategy that corresponds to your portfolio returns. Next will be stickiness. And what I mean by stickiness is whether your story, your dashboard, is easy to understand, whether it's memorable. And in my personal opinion, I think this is the hardest because a lot of times, if you want it to be memorable, you will try to be creative, but you also have to be very careful not to cause distraction or confusion, right? So this dashboard by Sarah, she's the one of the top leaders in Singapore, and this really stuck with me. She built this 1 year ago over Makeover Monday. And it really stuck with me because I think it's really smart, very clever how she used the bubbles, the circles in the mark type to represent metals, right? And all the way on the left, you can see those options. Those are basically the parameters she uses to engage her end users. So her end users, her readers, can choose what countries they want to compare medal counts with. And then the person can select which type of medals they will look at. It really resonates and sticks with me because those visuals corresponds and resonates very well with looking at medals. So in summary, if we think about telling a story, we must have 3 prerequisites. We must have those 3 elements. That's the data, the narrative, and the visual. And if you want to tell a good story or a compelling story, you want to make sure those informations that you are displaying is going to be clear and engage your users, your readers, and it sticks, it's memorable. Now let's look at this example that I got from Tableau Public. It's a wealth management dashboard that I looked at back when I was working with a private wealth management in the banking arm. So what this does, if you look at it from the top, you can first select which measure or KPI you want to drive the dashboard. And then you can select what period you want to compare it against and from what time or what point in time you want to compare that with. So the first section gives you the bands, right? There's the up and down arrow telling you whether it's performing better or worse than the previous time period. And then we have the different angles that they look at in terms of states, region, over time, advisors, and products. It seems like it's a good story, right? But I believe back then there is more we can do to amp it up. So let's look at how layout and chart types can make a difference. And when we think about appropriate chart types, there's this resource that is available for everyone right now. That's the visual vocabulary done by the Financial Times. And it makes a lot of sense to me to refer to this resource because media has been in charge of delivering information for as long as I know, especially with the wide range of audience they have to deliver it to. So every single time they have to get it spot on so that the message is clear and the message is concise. And what's even better is Andy, who's another Zen master that I look up to, recreated this and published it to Tableau Public. So why this is better is better because now you can see that you are going to use a certain chart type for a particular analysis, and at the same time, you know that you can achieve it in Tableau. What do you think this is? So the data community definitely resonate very well with this. So the visual editor from The Guardian tweeted the following. You laugh. I have been there before. I'm sure you have. So, there's actually a lot of times that it petrified me when I see certain things with my users. Why is that? Because you see, in a lot of cases, people want to use a fancy chart to impress, to try to make it stand out. But it really isn't the best choice for the audience. It really isn't the best choice to convey a clear message. So if we look at this example, sales and profit by customers, we are clearly wanting to know which customers is the most favorable to us. We want to rank our customers. But guess what? This is a real case. This is what I first saw. And back then, I was more blunt than right now. I go, why do you do that? So to me, we really want to make sure you're choosing the right chart types and you're not doing it to lengthen people's time to process the information in your dashboard. You're not doing it just for the sake that it's pretty, it's fancy, but you really want to do it because it tells you a clear story. So let's try to make over this wealth management dashboard and look at each of these elements we have right here. So the first thing I looked at was the bands, and I realized we have the shape and the color actually representing the same information. So I decided to change all the marks to just text and have the colors represent whether it's going better or worse than the previous time period. All right, and next we have the bars, and we want to do the same thing for our bars. And before we color them, I was thinking if I were to put the states in this bar chart, and whether there's any managers managing each of the states, is that going to be too much information? And I realized it's actually not. So I put them all together in one, and in this product view, again, same thing, we want to reduce the amount of information we need to process. So hence, we just color it to be consistent with our previous editing and change those arrows to just a circle. So same thing with our advisors. You're gonna do the same thing, and how you create a lollipop chart is basically drag the same value next to itself, change the shape type, right, or the mark type. One is the line and the other with the circle, and make it dual axis, and definitely make sure you synchronize the axis. Right, and this is the map we saw earlier, and the line chart that was corresponding to the region that was meant to be a spark line. So we want to make sure this spark line is going to fit well with the addition on managers and states. All right, there we go. So that's the first part. We have just done a little bit on changing the chart types to try to make our message simple and clear to understand. Next, let's look at layout. And when we talk about layout, and I personally think of Johnny Walker when I first think of who has really established his style. And you can see here with the composition, with the focal point that he creates, you can immediately, instantly know that this dashboard is about birds. And in fact, if you go to his public profile, he is the master of birds infographics. And if you look closer, the chart types he's using is really just bar charts, bubble charts, and maps. There's nothing too fancy about it. But the message comes across really, really strong and very clear because of the layout he chose to use. So if we reference it to the print design or the concept in editorial, you can see how he makes use of composition and the concept of focal points to deliver and draw people's attention to his key message. So what is a focal point? A focal point is where you can make use of size, color, position to draw people's gaze to it and make people want to look further. And this helped him create and achieve his goal and to deliver the fact that, hey, my dashboard is going to be about birds. If you're interested, look further. And if we were to continue with the concept in print, we also see the importance of gutters and margins. And in Tableau 10.4, we have introduced paddings and margins in our dashboard design screen. So if you think about it, imagine going to the shop. This is my favorite analogy. Which shop do you rather go to? The one on the right? So why do you want to go to the one on the right? Because it makes you feel more comfortable visually, right? It makes you feel that you are going to have space to go through the items in there. So that's what negative space, that's what paddings will help you achieve, right? Usually, the more paddings you have, the more white space you give, in the dashboards, is going to let people have the comfort, and it's going to delight your end users reading those dashboards. But if you think that it's going to be too complicated, you don't have enough time to design a sophisticated dashboard layout, I usually go with these two options. One, if you have a story to tell, design to grid is usually a very effective and simple way to tell your story. And option two is what I use a lot, is section and strip. It gives you that visual direction. It gives you that direction where your end users know exactly where they're going to start and end, because there's only one way to look at it, right? And at the same time, because you are only structuring it for the visual direction, you now have a lot more real estate, a lot more space to figure out if you want to make it something exploratory, you want to allow people to construct their own story. So now let's go back to that wealth management dashboard. We have the parameters and the icons right on top. And I'm removing that because all it says was, to click, right? And we have distributed the parameters and drag it down to have it in the middle. And if you look at the center section, it's basically regions, managers, and states. And we can basically remove the map because we already have that in our bar chart and our spark line. So over here, I'm going to use the option of section and strips to put everything in one section from the left to the right. And I'm dragging a container to bring my bands into the container. Okay, and with distribute evenly in the container, we can very quickly align our bands easily. So each of these sheets, I want to make sure I have enough negative space. I want to increase the paddings I have across each of the sheets. And now adjusting my charts so that we can fit all of them, right? And with this, we just need to hide all the headers, because we already have that in the first chart, the bullet chart in front, right? So we can make that spark line very small without all the headers repeating the same information. Okay? So now with this, the last thing we pretty much need to do is to increase that negative space for all our sheets and containers. Okay, and the last thing, bring the color legend to the bottom. Next, let's look at the concept of text or narrative, as we discussed before. And the role of text is really to enhance and complement the visuals, the dashboards that we are trying to build. You can use text in a way to introduce, to give more context, to explain, to give details in your dashboard. Now let's look at an example by Samuel. In his example, he looked at which of the major cities in the world has the most expensive property. So if we look at it on top, the title introduced the dashboard and its purpose. The subtitles further explain the core questions that Samuel is asking. If you look at the chart in the center, the longer the stretch, the more space you will be able to buy with $1 million US. Now, looking at the radial chart at the center in the middle, the annotation gives us a point of reference while also drawing the attention to the key insights. So you see Sao Paulo is the least expensive, and Monaco is the most expensive, and Los Angeles falls in the middle. And all the way on the right, we have the guidance to help us look at how to read the chart. Next example is done by Jenny, one of the multiple Viz of the Week author. And this Viz is about Outlander and whether the TV series has an impact on book sales. So over here up on the title, she used the title to explain and help navigate the users to each episode. Top right, there's the information icon on demand, right? If you want to see more details and background about Outlanders, you can go to that. The center is a dynamic content label that will be changing as you click on a particular episode. If we look at the focus, which is the favorite part in this dashboard for me, is that you can see the title clearly asks the question, how the TV series affect book sales? And typically, I find using a question as a title header is the most effective. And then we have the subtitles, the content, presenting the data, and the guidance in the form of annotation and reference line, and finally, the details in tooltip. So when we talk about tooltip, I realize the selection tooltip or tooltip selection is actually a heavily underused feature that I personally find really, really useful. Tooltip selection allows you to dynamically explore your data as you select on a particular data point in the tooltip, and it highlights everything relevant that's on the same chart. So it's usually very, very useful when you have a big scatter plot, when you have a big map with a lot of location, and maybe they have different brands and you want to look at where those brands are. So tooltip selection is actually really, really powerful. And of course, Viz and tooltip is something I'm sure every one of you has used before. It's been really, really popular, and you can see from Viz yesterday how some of them have used Viz and tooltip in their dashboards. So the example on the right is where Tom has used a mini scorecard in the tooltip for context and for relevance of the stock tracking he has in dashboard. So the next example is done by Adam. And this dashboard is very, very attractive, is very, very outstanding in a lot of ways. So if we start with the right, it's basically the description of his career and each of his album. And as you walk through, as you scroll through those descriptions, the album will be highlighted in the chart on the left. And as you scroll through, as you hover over one particular singles in that album, you will see in the tooltip the details about that song. What's the energy, what's the popularity, the acoustics, and so on. And also a text about what inspired him to write that song. And because it's not your typical chart types that you look at, he has a note on the bottom right that gives you an idea, that explains to you how you can read his dashboard. Also, that's another example of how you can use Viz in tooltip. Remember one of our Viz winner last night or yesterday, Hisham? Yeah? Isn't he amazing? This is another dashboard that he created on Tableau Public, making use of the show and hide buttons. When you click on that eye icon on the top right, A container overlays on the dashboard itself, giving you instruction, giving you guidance of how you read each part of the dashboard. And I thought that is really, really smart. If you look at the summary here, we basically want to avoid causing confusion using text. Now let's go back to our wealth management dashboard. So in my opinion, I thought the title, the dashboard title, wasn't clear enough. So I thought I want to add the dynamic element into it. So wealth management by the particular measure or KPI we are looking at. And I want to add a subtitle in the form of what's the core question we are trying to answer with this dashboard. And basically what is about whether that KPI has improved over the selected time comparing to the previous period that was selected. Because the previous period that was selected, it could be compared to the previous month, quarter, or year. So in dashboard title, you can add in those dynamic parameters, dynamic inserts to the title so that every time you interact with your dashboards, the title will change corresponding to what you're looking at. So then the rest will be just editing the current titles of each of the elements. So going through the top, we have a spelling error there compared to prior without the T. And then just going to the bottom, because we already have that dynamic elements in the dashboard title, we don't really need that in every single sheet's title. So it's going to be simply the regional manager's performance by different states that they look after. And the spark line is a monthly spark line. And our product performance. And the top 5 advisors by that chosen metrics. So one thing that we want to make sure of is because of the top 5 filters, we want to make sure the actions filters are put into context so that those top 5 will be functioning correctly. Now let's go back to the color itself. And that's the last element I would think is a really, really powerful way to adjust the display and the message you can change to your audience. So when you talk about color, it's essentially, or usually 2 things. One, the hue, which is the color itself. The choice of color itself, sometimes it can be a combination that's harmonious. Sometimes it could be a combination that clashes that you can use to your advantage. And intensity, which is also known as opacity in Tableau right now. And you can also choose those opacity level in Tableau. So let's look at an example by Mike again on the oil and gold dashboard. Why this is really impactful, because when you look at this, not only he used the composition of splitting in 2, he also used color in terms of focal point to shove the idea of gold and oil in your face, right? So you can't ignore it. It's right there, right? That's the first thing you see. You see 2 colors, right? You can't ignore it. You know exactly what he's going to talk about. The color used here is a fantastic way to tell the story and make it super, super clear. And color is used not only in a way that will make it sticky, like the way that Mike has used before, but it's also used sometimes in a way to trigger emotions. So if you look at this example that I've learned from Andy, you compare the one on the left and right, just with the change of color. If you were to ignore the title at all, you will still feel the difference in terms of emotion with this dashboard. And color indeed has been researched by many, many researchers, psychologists, scientists. And if you look at this color wheel done by Robert, you may agree or disagree. And that's completely normal because there are many theories of how people relate to colors emotionally. So it's normal because the colors has been still debatable in terms of how exactly it impacts human psychology. And that's usually because of how human or how people has different background, culture, their preference in terms of color. How many of you have seen this dashboard before? Oh, not that many. So this is done by the Iron Viz winner 2 years ago, Tristan. And when I showed this to those who haven't, they first thought this dashboard is about politics in the States. But what this really is about property. And the only reason he chose those two colors was because he's French. So you see, colors can be very, very powerful. It can trigger us a lot. But if you think about colors in just these three perspectives, to me, it makes my life way simpler. And again, this concept is borrowed from the web UI concept. And when I think about primary colors, it's actually when it makes up most or majority of my interface. The more grayscale I have, it usually gives a clearer message. It usually allows bigger contrast. And extended colors I usually use when I want to do an emphasis, if I want to emphasize on a specific point. And extended colors are usually used as well for corporate branding. And if you look at the one on the right, the status color or the alerting colors, it should only be prominent, in my opinion, it should only be prominent when it's critical, when you want to trigger or motivate specific action outcomes. So if we go back to the finance world, this tends to be something that they instantly go to first. They love the traffic light colors. But why do we want to avoid this? The reason is because when you use the whole combination of the traffic light colors, it may sometimes trigger irrelevant or unnecessary emotions to certain people. And also at the same time, which is a more important reason, is that this combination is not colorblind friendly. If you look at the combination at the bottom, it's actually what they see. So now if you're looking for inspiration for color palettes, this resource from Canva is what I find really, really useful. You can upload an image that you like, and it will give you a set of palettes with the code that you can put into your preference file. What could be even better would be probably the one done by Neil. He posted this on Tableau Public. He basically created multiple sets of color palettes, and if you select on any of the ones that you like, you'll be able to access exactly what you need to copy and paste it in your preference file. Another option you can do is to entirely ignore the choice of colors in your charts, but use an image in your dashboard background to allow that stickiness to enhance the memorability of your dashboard by having all your sheets in the transparent background. But what we really want to do eventually is to avoid this. This is a term that I learned from Tom. It's called pilk. Apparently, it's a polite way of discouraging the use of too many colors. I'm not sure. But I don't know if you guys have been there, but I have been there before. I have built things like that. It's never going to be that bad, but if you go anywhere close to that, there's no point of using colors, right? So a similar concept built by Ryan is called data ink ratio. So what the data ink ratio basically tells us is that when you put additional colors or unnecessary colors or ink on your chart, it doesn't actually value add to the message you are trying to deliver. So if you look at before and after, you see how much difference that makes to your message. And a very similar concept, or probably the best advice I've ever received in my 5 years, is to start my dashboard with gray color palette. And this example is done by Andy. If you see this example, it started with a really colorful line chart, green, and another 2-line chart. But if you look at this in gray, it just immediately reduce and fade out the distraction or the amount of information you need to process. And from there, you can choose a single color to enhance or emphasize the message you're trying to deliver. And sometimes you maybe want to relate back to what color in your corporation best perceive or best relate to what they are supposed to think of in terms of the message that you're delivering. So in summary, you want to use color wisely. And if you're stuck, for me personally, I start with gray. And then from there on, add one color at a time if you think that's the best. So let's go back to our wealth management dashboard. We want to first remove the unnecessary ink that is not related to the data we're trying to say. So over here, we're trying to remove that background color in the titles. And we realized in the format it doesn't work, so you go to the workbook style and you change that. So now we want to change all the titles, but we don't want to go one by one. So on the format workbook, we can actually change all the fonts in one place. We can change it to the same font and change it to the same size and color. So the last thing would be formatting all the unnecessary ink, and usually there are lines that's at the background of your charts. So if you go to format and lines, in this case we have columns lines, and also we are removing all the axis numbers, because if you hover onto the data points, you can see those numbers in your tooltip. So same thing for our product performance and our top 5 advisors. Okay, and one more thing we wanted to do is, again, change it to a single color, because green and red are actually the same color to certain people. Okay, so we have changed that for most of our sheets, and go back to the bands and change that number to gray. All right. And lastly, just touch up on the title a little bit. Make sure it can be seen. And that's it. So we have covered a lot of grounds, and I hope we've both, you and I, come to a conclusion that a good, impactful dashboard really tells a compelling story with the right use of color, text, layout, and chart types. But what I really want to emphasize here as well is you don't want to make perfecting your dashboard the end goal or the enemy of the fast iteration Tableau enables you to do. Because the whole point is for you to get on a visual analytics journey to find that key insights behind the huge amount of dashboards that you have, huge amount of data you have. And dashboards really is something that when you amp it up, it helps people kickstart their data journey, but that should not be your end goal. So still remember how the wealth management dashboard looked like originally? This is before and after. You want to do that again? Before. Okay, camera's done. And after. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed the session. I really appreciate if you were to give us feedback, and that will help us improve our session next year. I highly encourage you to check out these 2 sessions that I personally want to look at. And the session will repeat tomorrow again in the same time, but in a different room. Have a good sessions.